everyone, I'm Dave. I'm a 3D artist and Unreal educator based in Manchester, UK. Today I'm going to be sharing a workflow with you that I think is a total game changer. It's a tool which is easy to build, pretty much infinitely expandable, and can be used for projects on any scale. Today we're going to be looking into blueprint array meshes. I use these constantly across all my different projects as they make my work fast, less tedious manual placement of objects. It's fun, it's kind of procedural, and for the new users, it's kind of dipping a toe into the world of technical art without throwing yourself into the crazy hard stuff. So, first of all, let's talk about what array meshes are for those who don't know, or for those who are a little bit unclear. Now, before we start dragging pins and dropping nodes, I want to talk about the backbone of the system, the array. Now, for those of you who are new to development, this side might sound a little bit computer sciencey, it might sound a bit complex, but really it's not. We use these every day in our daily lives. Now, I've got a little chart here. So what we've got here is when we're building a scene or we're building a blueprint, normally we're dealing with single versions of things. If we're building an environment, a dungeon, whatever, we're dealing with a single pillar. We'll drag in a single pillar all the time. We'll call something in a blueprint a single time all the time, or we'll have to do a different blueprint for each individual things. So here, you know, we're dragging in lots of things into our scene, lots of assets. We're dragging in individual ones all the time. What an array mesh allows us to do is give everything in a container. So that array mesh blueprint will contain lots of different assets, and then when we drag the blueprint into the scene, we can basically choose whatever asset we want in that place at that time. I like to think about it as if you're moving house. If you move in house, you don't take one object at a time and put it in the van. You put things in boxes. So you put all your plates in one box, you put all your bedding in another box, you put all your books in another box, and you move them like that. You can number them, you can organize them, you can do things very, very fast. And this is the same kind of thing here. We can have many different array mesh blueprints for many different assets. Now we can even go a bit more complex. We can have an asset deal with multiple different things. These are infinitely expandable within reason. So I can have this one blueprint deal with this element and another element, so I can make more versatility, more variation. Now I'm talking from the standpoint of an environment artist. When it comes to blueprinting, you'll have other reasons why you might do this. So what we're looking at today is more of a blueprint for the level designers, for the 3D artists, to make our life a little bit easier. So just to make sure we're understanding what we're talking about, an array is something that contains multiple bits of data, of the same kind of data. Now for us, what we're going to be doing is filling that full of static meshes so that we can bring it into the scene and cycle through what we want, and it helps us speed up our whole, development timeline. Now first of all, we need meshes and we need a purpose. So I would never try and make everything in the scene, everything in my game, fit into one array mesh blueprint. That would be insane. So I like to think about it in little groups. I'm thinking pillars, I'm thinking tables, or things that go on tables. What I'm not going to try and do is put everything in there or make an array mesh blueprint for every last little thing. I'm not going to make a whole mesh blueprint for all my floors and all my walls and all my roofs. Some things, they just need to be their own thing. I like using this to help me do variations. If I'm looking at a scene and I'm seeing a lot of the exact same thing, especially pillars or anything that's a repeating kind of thing, I'll make sure that I've got some kind of array mesh set up for these that I can cycle through. Maybe it's just the damage that it's taken, or the design that's on top of something, or maybe many different reasons why we might need variation. So let's jump into Unreal and let's start setting this up. So in my scene here, I've got a few assets that I'm actually going to use to create these blueprints with. Now, just to preface what we're going to do ahead of time, we're going to make a blueprint, which is going to be obviously the container for everything. And then within that blueprint, we're going to be creating two variables. One variable is going to be the box. It's the thing that contains all the meshes. And then another variable is basically saying how many of those things are in the box we can access. And then we're going to do a little bit of blueprint building, very, very simple blueprint building, and then we'll have our blueprint good to go. And then we'll make a couple of variations to it, gradually building up in complexity, and then by the end of it, you'll have some easy, simple, but very usable blueprints to play with in your own projects and take away to mess with. So if you've never done blueprinting before, don't worry about it. We're going to go through nice and simple. If you've done a little bit of blueprinting, you might learn something from this. But if you've done blueprinting before, you probably already know how to do this, or you'll be able to follow along quite readily with me. Cool. So first of all, we need a blueprint. So what I'm going to do is come to my blueprints folder that I've set up for myself. I'm going to add a blueprint. So if we go to add here, add blueprint class. And the blueprint class that I want is an actor, because an actor is an object that can be placed and spawned within the world. That's exactly what we want. So click that, and then we'll get this. So I need to give it a name. So it's a blueprint, so I will be calling it BP, but I want to know that what it actually does. So this is an array mesh blueprint. So I'm going to call this AMBP. So AMBP underscore what is it controlling at first? Well, it's going to be controlling my pillars at first. And then because I'm going to make a couple of different variations of this pillar, I'm going to call it pillar A. There we go. So this is my array mesh blueprint pillar A. Cool. So what we're going to do is actually go into our blueprint and start creating our functionality. So we're going to open up our blueprint. For those of you who've never done blueprinting before, don't worry about what's going on screen. We're just going to talk about what we're actually needing to make this blueprint work. Those of you who do know a little bit about blueprinting, you'll know what's going on screen a little bit. But what we're not going to do is do anything in the event graph. The event graph is purely for when the game is running, when we're actually playing. What we're going to be doing is from the construction script, because this is all about when the object is created, when we drag it in from the content browser. So first of all, we want to make those two variables we were talking about, the integer and the array. So we're going to make the integer first. So on the left hand side, you've got variables, and we'll just click the little plus icon on the right to add a variable, and we'll call this mesh num. And what this is going to do, when you spell it right, is going to, there you go. What this is going to do is basically give us the ability to say how many things are going to be selectable inside this blueprint. Currently it's set to Boolean, so we're going to change this to integer right here. And we're going to click this little eye icon to the right of it. What this does is it allows us to expose something in the editor, so we can actually grab our details tab when we're in the scene and actually adjust stuff on the fly. The next thing we're going to do is create our static mesh variable. So I'm going to click variable again, add that. I'm going to call this mesh type. And this time I'm going to change it from an integer to a static mesh array. So first of all, we need to get reference to a static mesh. So I'm going to search static mesh right there. I'm going to make sure it's referencing an object. So when you see the static mesh, just go over object reference. There we go. And you'll see here on the right hand side, we've got the variable type static mesh, but it is a single variable right here, which means it's only going to look at one thing. What we need to do is change this to array. So now we've got access to many things. Our box is big. So we're going to click compile again, and you'll see that it now says mesh type and there's 0 array elements. But if I click this little plus icon to the side, I can start adding array elements, which is where we're actually going to put our meshes, which is super cool. Awesome. So before we start constructing anything as well, I also need the actual static mesh. We've added a static mesh variable, but all that is doing is just giving us access to call to look at these variables. What I need is an actual static mesh within the scene or within the blueprint to use as it kind of like its place to be. So what I'm going to do is come up to components on the left hand side, click add, and again I'm going to search for static mesh. Static mesh there, boom, and I'll call this object. So I know that that is that. Now there's currently nothing in it, but we're going to put some stuff in it later on, but we're also going to need that to help our whole function, our whole thing work. So let's get building. First of all, what we need to do is from this construction script, we need to pull out from the execution pin this little arrow, and we need to set array elements. So I'm going to type in set array elem. And what this does, it basically says when the construction script is ran, it's going to say, right, you're choosing from a set, you're setting an array element. You're becoming an array element, so it knows what its function is. And from here, I'm just going to static mesh in our variables, and I'm literally going to grab this guy, drag him in. I'm going to get static mesh, or get mesh type. And from this little square here, I'm going to drag it into where it says target array. And boom, that's ready to go. And then I'm also going to grab the mesh number, drag that in, and get that. And now this is ready to go for the first bit. So first of all, what we're doing is when the construction script is run, we're going to set an array element, and then it's going to say, well, this is my toy box, this is my box to look into for my bits and pieces. So what I'm going to do now is make the actual static mesh render in the scene. It's very, very easy. If I just drag out from the set array element, out from there, I'm going to set static mesh, and set static mesh brackets object. That's referencing the object we brought in our components before. So I'm going to click that, add it in there. Just for housekeeping, I'm just going to drag this on top like this. Now a couple more steps to go until we're done with this. So what I want to do is actually just be able to, when the array element is looking at our toy box, I'm then going to say, right, we're going to choose one of those objects and put it into the static mesh slot. So I'm going to drag out from the mesh type variable, click get, or search get. So it's looking into the box, it's getting something, and then we're going to get that object from the integer, and then we're going to put it into the static mesh. So that's the blueprint chain set up. But there's a couple of things to do before we actually have this working. What I want to do first of all is add the amount of blueprints that I want into the scene. Sorry, the amount of static meshes. So what I'm going to do is click on my static mesh variable. I'm going to click this. I have 5 pillars that I want to add in. So I'm going to click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. And then in my content browser, I actually have those 5 pillars. So I'm going to start adding those in. Like this. Like this. And then in my set array element, I do actually want to add a blueprint in here, or not a blueprint again, a static mesh inside here. So I've put my static mesh, my first pillar, in where it says item here. If nothing is in there, you won't actually see anything in the scene. And then in my mesh number, I'm just going to say 5. Or 4, sorry. I put 4 in for a reason. You'll see why in a second. And done. Compiled. So I've already dragged this into the scene. And you see there now that we've got a static mesh, which is really good. And if I drag another one, I'll go back to my blueprints. I will drag another one of these pillars in, like that. Cool. Now, why this is so good is because when I click on this, in our details here, if I click on a standard object, you get this. If I click on this, we get a little bit different. At the very top, we've got default mesh number. And if I click and scrub on this, you'll see it actually filters through those static meshes. So I can go and I can decide what I want in the scene. Now you'll notice that when I go past 4, it disappears. So we've got 5 in the number here, but there's nothing in 5. And I can just keep going for an ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Just keep going up and up and up and up. That's because 0 is slot 1. And then 1 is technically slot 2, 3 is technically slot, it goes on like that. So think about 0 as 1, and you're always kind of working one number down. But we can go past that mesh number and just keep going infinitum, because in the blueprint, what we've not done for the integer, the number, is we've not given it a number range, a value range. So I'm going to give it 0 to 4, 0 to 4. There we go. Compile that. And now we can't go past 4. So we can actually say if there's 5 objects in the scene, we'll put 0 to 4. If there's 10 objects in the scene, in the blueprint, we'll go 0 to 9. So now, that blueprint is allowing me to have lots of different variation on the fly. All from one blueprint. So instead of having to drag in the object all the time. So that's the very basic one. You can see we're just dealing with one basic object, and that's cool. But what if I want to do a little bit more variation? Well, that's why I've got this set up here. And this is really, really simple. It's ludicrously simple, this. Ludicrously simple. So what I'm going to do is come into my blueprint editor. I'm literally going to copy paste this whole blueprint. I'm going to call this pillar B. So now if I open up this one, back into my construction script. So I've just copy pasted the blueprint, so it's all exactly the same, which is great. But what I'm going to do is add another 2 variables and another static mesh. So I'm going to put I'm going to rename, should I say? I'm going to rename this first integer as, say, top. Or mesh num top. I'll go mesh num. No, I'll go top mesh num. Top mesh num. And then top mesh type. And then I do exactly the same thing again. I add another integer. I'm going to call this mid mesh num. So this is the middle mesh number. And then I add another for the mid mesh type. Again, change these back to the same variables as there was before. So that mesh num is going to be an integer. And this mesh type is going to be another static mesh object reference array. So, you know, repeating stuff. Repetition is the best way to learn. There we go. So what I'm going to do is grab this. Oh, sorry, I've forgotten what to do. I forgot to add that static mesh. Static mesh. So this one, I'm going to rename it to top. And this new one, I'm going to call it mid. And what I'm going to do is grab this little chunk, copy paste that, move it over here a little bit. And all I'm going to do is where we've got in the set static mesh here for the second one, I've got top. I'm just going to delete that top. I'm going to drag in the mid and put that in instead. Like that. Plug this set static mesh into set array element like this. So that's the chain from the top. And then I'm going to mimic what I've done here over here. So I'm going to grab the mid num, plug it into there. And I'm going to grab the mid mesh type, bring it in, get that, and then plug that into the array mesh and plug that into the get. And that's awesome. What I need to do now, though, is change my array element numbers and change my array element meshes. So in the top number, if I compile everything. Now I still want to have 5 in there, so I'm going to make sure I've got my 0 to 4, because I still want 5 meshes. But in my mesh types, for my top, I'm going to change my meshes. So if I come into my content browser, I'm going to go to my pillars. I've got these tops and bottoms here. So I'm going to drag each one of these into this slot right there. Like that. Now over here, it's going to be a little bit different. My number for my mid is only going to be 3. So 0 to 2, because I've only got 3 versions of this. So my mesh types for that as well, I'm going to add 1, 2, 3. And then we've got this going into there, this going into there, this going into there. And in my set array element, I'm just going to drag this first pillar into that slot, like that. And if we click apply, or compile at the top there, cool, awesome. Come back in here, we go to our blueprints again. Oops, it is, there we go. And then I'm going to drag in pillar B. Now you see on this one, we've got 2 sliders. 2 sliders here. So we've got one slider which is controlling the tops. Oh, but I need to actually go back into my blueprint for that. And I've got to change this. I've forgotten to do that then. Naughty me. So I go to my geometry, my pillars. I'm just going to grab that top, put it into there. That's better. There we go. Look how fast it is to adjust these. So now what I've got is the ability to change what's on top of the pillar and what's in the middle of the pillar. So I can make, I think it's 15 different variations with this. And because they are all independent, from each other, I can make some really cool design choices. Very, very cool. Now if I want to add it to this, if I want to add another, say, another middle or another top to this, it's just as simple as coming in, adjusting the numbers to this. So say I want to add one more middle to the mids. One more middle there. So I'm going to add one more middle there. Get my middle that I want. I'll just grab this one. And that's it. Oh, well, for my middle number, I've got to adjust it. I've got to move my number up 1. Silence it. There we go. So now with that, what I've got is an extra middle. So adding and taking away, it's super, super easy. Very, very easy. So we've got two different array elements there. One which is just controlling one object, just a pillar. And then we've got the second one, which is the same blueprint. It's just we're doing another chunk right there. So we're just adding the same blueprint, the same variables on the left-hand side. We're just adding like the same for two new things. So I've got a top, a middle. If I want to have a different top, a different middle, a different bottom, all I do is make sure that I've got, you know, the static mesh just for the top, a static mesh just for the middle, a static mesh just for the bottom. And then I could have that variation of choice as well. Like I said, this is something you can do in infinitum. You can, you know, within reason, just go on and on and on and on and on with this. But obviously, it depends on how much you want to faff around with it. So, you know, this is a really nice way of just being able to quickly change things to fit your, you know, fit your scene, fit your project, whatever. Now, the last one I'm going to make is a bit more of an involved one, but it's still just as cool. So I've got a couple of examples of this in place. So I've got a scene here which I'm building, and you can see why stuff like this is good. Because if I have to manually place a lot of these different objects around, because it's a, you know, it's a bit of a busy environment, then it's going to be very tedious. It's going to take me a long time to constantly drag stuff in. And if I've got another person coming in, you know, looking at it, giving me advice, helping me do variations, if I'm constantly dragging things in and out, even though they are related, it just takes time in it. So that's why having those little bits set up, oops, there you go, having those little things set up that I can just come in there and make adjustments, you know, because someone could say, oh, well, all the pillars look very monotone, like very, very monotonous, very repeating. You know, I can come in there and start changing things. I can come in and change elements to the tables, which I've not done just yet, but, you know, we can add elements to the tables. Where we can do that as well is I've got a project set up here that I'm using with my own students, where I've got blueprint objects within another blueprint. So in here, I've got just a simple static mesh in a blueprint. So this whole thing is a static mesh. But in here, I've actually got array meshes. So I've got all these different Polaroid pictures here that I can just change. So I can even drag these into another blueprint and give myself lots of variation. And that's as simple as just making a blueprint, adding a static mesh to it, and then dragging in those blueprint objects, those blueprint arrays that we made before, and then positioning where I want. Very, very cool. And you can also, if we go back to our original little scene we had going, there we go. We can also do something that's a little bit more kind of heavy-handed. It's questionable how effective it's going to be, but what we can do is also just drag in a bunch of these. So I've literally got the same mesh going over and over, or the same blueprint going over and over and over and over like that. And all I've got to do here is set up 6 times those those variables. So I'll quickly do that. So with everything plugged into that, this is what it looks like. It runs pretty well. I'm sure someone's going to turn around to me and say, you could have done this a much easier way, but this is just a nice little fun way for us to set up a really uber level array mesh. So I've got 6 different mesh nums, I've got 6 different mesh types, and then the scene, what it looks like is this. So I've got 3 of the tables there. So literally just dragged it into the scene like that. And what I've got per table are 6 slots with 6 different objects in each slot. So I can cycle through and decide what I want per position. Now, if you think of this for set dressing, for level design, anything like that, this could be an absolute changer for, you know, having to place and decide stuff. You can even put empty slots in there. So I could add, if I add the, if I actually do it, I'll actually go do it. If I add each one of these, I'll give it a range of 6 on each of these. So on each integer, I've just given myself 0 to 6 this time. So that'll be 7 slots. So what I will have is a position on each one that I can actually just empty out. So I could have an absolutely bare table that I'm choosing just like 1 or 2 items to be on. Or I can have a full table full of all my different things and have them all be randomized to be whatever. You know, it gives you a lot of fun stuff to play with. And that's just quite a basic setup, but where you can take this is wherever your imagination can take you. A challenge would be, on construction, randomize the integers so that every time you bring it out, it's going to be a different decision on what number. You can still go in and change your numbers later on, but as it builds, it's a different kind of like setup. It chooses different numbers of all the integers. Or maybe put something into your blueprint where on construction it actually randomizes the rotation and maybe the scale, especially if you're doing organic stuff. So I could I could randomize the rotation in 90-degree increments on these so that it's not the exact same side either time, and I could do that on the top and the bottom. So bit of challenge. But yeah, that is a really fun way that we can use some simple blueprinting along with our models to help us expedite our building process, have a bit of fun. And of course, because all this is built off static meshes as well, if I update a static mesh with new UVs, if I get some textures on there with some materials, it'll all propagate throughout the entire scene, which is great. So we don't have to rebuild anything, we don't have to re-import anything. All we have to do is, keep updating the meshes that we've got in there, and your whole object will just keep getting better and better and better. So you can start off really simple, and then you can see this thing really take form very fast. So hopefully that's give you a lot of help, and I enjoyed doing it, and hopefully that's not the last time you'll see me.